This time on Meet the Guitars, it's the Telecasters. Telecasters, plural, because there's 4. This time on Meet the Guitars, I'm going to introduce you to a set of guitars that all sort of share a common similarity, which is that they're all based on the Fender Telecaster. Now, they're not necessarily all Fender Telecasters per se, but the Telecaster was the first successful mass-produced electric guitar way back in the days. And Fender clearly got something right because they're still incredibly popular today, and there's just something about them that's just so sort of basic and structurally good that people love them still. I have 4 Telecaster type guitars, and I say Telecaster type guitars because technically none of them are Fender Telecasters in the purest sense. I mean, most of them are made by Fender, but not all of them. And honestly, the one that is the most Fender Telecaster of the Fender Telecasters is this one, which is not at all a Fender Telecaster. It's made by a guy named Rick Kelly, but we'll go into that in just a second. One of the interesting things about these 4 guitars is that they also sort of show off how I think about having a distinct purpose or value for each guitar that I have. And so while there are 4 Fender Telecaster type bodies, I use them all in very different ways. And so we'll get into that as well. So let's get started. The first one is the Telecaster made by Rick Kelly at Carmine Street Guitars in New York City. I was in New York City dropping my daughter off for her first year of college, and I stopped into Carmine Street Guitars and saw that they had some very interesting looking guitars that were clearly custom made. I wasn't sure what, this is the first time I'd heard of them. Since there's been a movie made about Carmine Street Guitars, and if you're interested in that, there'll be a link somewhere. It's kind of fun to watch. I watched it, and it was neat to see. And you'll see a lot of the history of this guitar in that film. But Rick was telling me about the guitars he was making, and that how he was really inspired by the original prototypes that Leo Fender was making the Telecaster when he was first starting out. And the first prototypes, and there are at least one of them still surviving, was made with pine wood. Now, most guitars these days are made with alder or something like that, but these were pine. And they also had a really big, thick maple neck, like this one. It's a huge neck on this guitar, which he said makes it much easier to play. And he's right. I mean, for long times of playing, this big neck guitar actually is less stressful on my thumb because it's just sort of the way that my hand is shaped. And I guess a lot of other people's as well. So it works great. So that's how he was building these guitars. But then the pine that he got, the wood for these bodies, came from a very interesting place. A friend of his told him about this building in the Bowery in New York, which is a neighborhood in New York, that was being torn down. And the building had been built back in the 1860s. And in the sort of rafters of the building were these big pine beams that had been holding up the building for 150 something years. And they were getting rid of them. And he's like, would you like them? He was like, yes, I would like those. And so he took them and he started making these guitars with them. And, you know, for anybody who builds guitars, you know that you need that wood to be very dry. You don't want a moist wood in there. And this wood had been baking literally for 150 years. Since the US Civil War era, it had been part of New York City and just drying out. And so it's incredibly light. It's very resonant. And when he was talking about these guitars, I was like, okay, I kind of want to have one of these guitars. And I didn't have any Telecaster at the time, so perfect opportunity. So I placed an order, and I picked the wood blanks that we would use for this guitar, as well as for the neck, and placed my order, and then went home figuring it won't be that long. A year later, I was dropping my daughter off for her second year of college, and I went down, and the guitar was ready. And I picked it up, and I love it. And it's been great. And it's been my sort of main Telecaster type guitar ever since then. You know, it's very sort of standard shape and the standard setup for everything and the original sort of 1-ply pick guard. And, you know, it's just incredibly solid and stable. It's got little, you know, knots in it still from the original thing. I actually picked mine to not have a lot of knots. He had ones that he really liked having lots of knots in there. I wasn't a big fan of that. I wanted something that looked, you know, that wasn't over-emphasizing its pininess, but as it plays, it sounds great, and it feels great, and it's very flexible in terms of tone. You back it off, you play with the tone knob, it gives you a whole range of the very Telecaster-y sounds. And so if I'm ever looking for something that is that, this is the guitar that I go to. But what about the other ones? My second Telecaster, this one's bright orange, which is lovely. And it's a Squier Telecaster from the Squier Affinity series. And one of the things that I bought this for originally was to have in my office when I was writing software, because I like having a guitar around. I didn't plug it in, and so I didn't care about the pickups. And the pickups in the Affinity series aren't so great, but the guitar actually is nice and stable and solid, and I really enjoyed that. But when I started recording more, I said, okay, here's this guitar I have. I want to do something with it, but what do I do with it? And so first thing I did was I changed the pickups. These are now Seymour Duncan humbucker pickups. Changed the electronics I used to control that. This is now a 5-position switch instead of the usual 3-position switch, so that I can actually choose between single coil or double coil on the pickups based on the position. And I changed the tuners to be locking tuners because you gotta love making it easier to change your strings. But it was still a Telecaster. It was a humbucker Telecaster, but I also had 2 humbucker guitars elsewhere. So what was going to do with this guitar to make it distinct? And in this case, what I chose to do was use a set of strings that come from Stringjoy for Nashville tuning. And Nashville tuning is basically, if you had a 12-string guitar, you have the regular, 6 of the strings are like a regular guitar, but 6 of them generally are an octave above the regular guitar strings. And then the 2 highest ones are actually the same pitch, but they're very high already. And what this is, it's just those high strings. And so instead of, being a low E, the E is actually, the low E is an octave up already from the original guitar. Same thing for the first 4 strings. And then the high 2 strings are actually lower than the previous ones, because that's how 12-string strings work. And it's actually lovely for playing parts that when you're recording, they're in a higher range. It's more sort of jangly. And so it's really nice to be able to have layer guitar parts in that sit in a different part of the sound. Sometimes it can sound almost like a mandolin even playing. And so when recording, it's just great to have a sort of another type of tone. And so between being able to be a humbucker or single coil and the different tuning, it now provides a different sort of spot. And yet has that sort of very comfortable play of a Telecaster. Telecaster number 3, black one. Nice little Washington State sticker on it. Kind of liked how that fit there. Looked really good. There's another Squier, but this one is a little different. It's a Squier custom Telecaster, it says. But here's the thing that's weird about this one, is it's actually a baritone guitar. So it's tuned lower. The low string is not an E, it's an A in this case. Tuned the same way. You can tune it a bunch of different ways, but I'm using a currently regular. It's useful for, again, sort of like the opposite of what the Nashville Tele is. It's sort of lower. And so you can play things that are just really heavy in terms of distortion and get very good sort of djenty type sounds. But also doing it cleanly, sort of have it as something that's not quite a bass, but just sort of fills into that lower space there. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun to have a baritone. I haven't actually used this in a song yet, so I'm still looking for the right opportunity for that. But it does sort of fill in a gap, and I've been sort of looking at playing around with baritones for a while now, and so I found this one and sort of made it mine. So again, Telecaster, same body, same type of pickups, same everything. It's what you'd expect from when you saw a Telecaster. You'd say, oh, that's a Telecaster. It's got a nice little binding on the guitar as well in the body. It's my baritone Telecaster. Number 4 on my Telecaster list. This one is the Fender Acoustasonic Telecaster. It is actually a Fender. It is actually a Telecaster, but it's an Acoustasonic Telecaster, which means that it's different, and so it's still not quite a Fender Telecaster. Maybe Fender will watch this and say, what you need is a Fender Telecaster, and they'll send me a Fender Telecaster, and that would be so sweet. It's not gonna happen. Anyway, this is my Acoustasonic Telecaster, and I love it. It is just a great sort of travel guitar, unless you're flying out of Spain. Long story. Almost never made it back, but I did. And we'll get into that some other time maybe. But Fender Acoustasonic Telecaster. It's got sort of magical special pickups as well as a regular magnetic pickup in there, which means you can get very acoustic sounds out of it, but you can also get sort of Telecaster-y sounds out of it. So for sort of, if you want to have one thing to go with you that you want to be able to play acoustic stuff like when we're songwriting, and then also be able to plug in and record and get some more good electric tones out of it, it's really nice. You know, if there's one guitar I was going to take with me, this was actually really great for that. And so, you know, when I play it, it sounds very acoustically, right? And you can crank it up. So just really flexible. This one is a Zercote version, so it's very pretty. And again, totally different sound. And so I'm often looking for a way that I can get my acoustic sound without doing all of the extra miking. In the end, the miking is pretty important, so that's why I have those guys for. But for being able to do quick demos of songs or for playing live and things like that, it's really nice for being able to have something like that that just gives me that great acoustic tone. And in this case, actually a bunch of different acoustic tones. So, Telecaster number 4, the Fender Acoustasonic Telecaster. So clearly there's something special about the sort of shape of this guitar, the way that, you know, that it feels when you play it, the way that you can get that upper reach. Like, I love the way that, and all Telecasters, they do this. It sort of comes, it doesn't come straight down here. It comes in a little bit, right? In fact, it's almost a complete arc that goes to that. Of course, it's not in the back because there's this thing, but just from the look of it, it's sort of a nice continuous curve there, which is sort of one of the telltale marks of a Telecaster. Those are the sort of 4 Telecasters that I have in my collection, and sort of how I use them. So that's it for this time on Meet the Guitars, the Tellies, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.